All right. As I mentioned today, we are going over real estate investing 101. So some of you that are expert flippers and investors, you may already know a lot of this, but this is really to build kind of those foundational skills for somebody that has never invested, or maybe they want to invest themselves, or even more importantly, if they want to represent investors and start having them as an ideal client. It's good to kind of understand the process, right? And then also just understanding those foundational skills, like I said, as the opportunity may come here to have more real estate investing opportunities. I am a firm believer that every real estate agent should invest at some point in their career. I realize that it definitely takes capital and it takes time to become an investor. But I think, we're teaching the American dream and we're teaching others to invest and to be able to make money, whether it's buy and hold or flip or what have you, that we should be doing it ourselves as well. So, with that said, just a little bit about me. I've already touched on, I'm a second generation real estate investor. So I was actually an investor before I got into real estate about 14 years ago. I'm a broker associate with eXp Realty. I've been with them since they were 300 agents, and co-owner with my husband of OKC Home Investments, where over the last decade, we have flipped hundreds of homes, anything from single family houses to apartments to strip centers, to now we're working on absolute net deals in restaurants. So kind of dabbled a little bit into everything. And what I'm going to share with you today is how we turned our initial $25,000 investment into a multi-million-dollar portfolio in less than 5 years. That was about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. So I want to share that with you because it doesn't take a lot of capital to get started. And just like many of you, we scraped every penny in order to purchase our first investment. Now, if you stick around all the way to the end, I'm actually going to share with you that first investment is, and it's something that you probably won't even believe. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity. I know for us, before we were able to build the capital for real estate investing, we did things as simple as even flipping a boat, right? I know that sounds silly, but essentially buying a boat on Craigslist or what have you, Facebook Marketplace, whatever, for $5,000, turning it, so, fixing it up a little bit and selling it for $10,000. And if you do that enough times, then you can start to build that foundation where you can start to invest into real estate. I was watching actually this morning, a real estate investor out of Nevada, where he talked about where he got started. He started flipping couches. So he was flipping couches, same thing, buy them on Craigslist, clean them up, shampoo them up a little bit, turn around and sell them. And so he did that until he was able to save enough capital and to get into real estate investing. With that said, this is not going to be one of those classes where I teach you how to get rich quick or to do it with no money down, because I do believe as an investor, it's important to have some working capital because things are going to happen that you have to be prepared for. Master Lead Generator, I've got a team of about 8 agents in Oklahoma City and spread throughout the state that we lead generate, as well as thousands of agents across the world that we coach and train. Married and mother of 2 wonderful boys. So much like you, many of you, just juggling personal life and professional life. Quick disclaimer, of course, as always, check your local guidelines and your managing broker, as guidelines for every brokerage, every market definitely do vary. So make sure you're checking with your broker. Now, here's the biggest question. Are you in the right place? So you guys know that many of our classes start with something to do with your mindset, right? We have to be mentally ready, because the reality is, if we're not mentally ready, I can teach you the strategy and the how-to all day long, but we have to have the right psychology and the right energy to put forth toward that effort. So with that said, this is just a quick 1.5-minute video that we're going to watch together.
You want to make a difference, you got to push. You got to stand up. You got to be willing to be hurt and damaged. You're not going to push into the next deal if you're satisfied with where you're at. Build now, enjoy later. Pay the price today so you can pay any price tomorrow. Pay attention to the successes and disregard your losses. If your people are not money motivated, reaching for freedom, not bills, your business cannot grow. Listen to what I'm telling you. You cannot grow your business saving money in the bank. This was your mommy and daddy's economy. Your mommy and daddy said, save your money. How many heard that when you were growing up? Save your money, okay? The last thing you want to do today is save money. I made this mistake in my life. What happens when you start worrying about losing something? You don't put it at risk. I should have been rolling that dough. That dough should have been having babies. What is the thing that you used to dream about that's a game changer for you?
So do we have any Grant Cardone fans in here? Let me go ahead and flip the cameras back on. Anybody, raise your hand if you are familiar with Grant Cardone. He's a personality, so you either like him or you hate him, right? For those that you know. But the reason why I have this video on here is because we are so ingrained in how we grow up, and myself included. So of looking at money as a bad thing. If you're going after money, if you're going after the dollar, then something must be wrong with you, right? And so in reality, real estate investing is very much a numbers game. It is about money. If you're not doing it for money, then you might as well not do it. And that's just full transparency. Now, money can buy you a lot of different things. It can buy you financial freedom, time freedom, location freedom. It can also allow you to be a philanthropist, whatever that is that you're passionate about. I believe it can accelerate more of who you are. If you're a good person, it's going to allow you to be better. If you're a bad person, it might allow you to be worse, right? So the reason why I say that is you have to be money motivated to become an investor, to look at the numbers. Now, with that said, that money never comes over principle, integrity, anything like that. So did anybody have any takeaways from that video that you'd like to share? Feel free to put them in the chat as well. Anybody looking for financial freedom? Go ahead and give me a yes or a no in the chat. Liz, I like that you said you need to spend money to make money. Absolutely. Vanessa, you have to take some risks to reach your goals. Love it. Perfect. Okay, great. So we're all on the same page here. I mentioned right before, as we were kind of talking offline just a little bit, that we're saving up because, we do believe that there's going to be an influx in short sales and foreclosures maybe in the next 12 months or so. But just as Grant said, money in the bank will never do you any good. Now, you do always want to have reserves, so definitely keep that in mind. But just sitting there and holding it in the bank and paying a very small percentage in return, the banks are basically using your money to make more money. So why not do it for yourself? So I'm a firm believer that, of course, as we have reserves, but my husband and I, the way that we operate, as a majority of our liquid cash is put into buying more real estate, because we know that over time, real estate is going to continue to appreciate. It might go up and down, but over time it continues to appreciate. And then one of the tax benefits is depreciation. So there's definitely some double-sided benefits there. One of Grant Cardone's famous quotes is, cash is, you guys we'll put in the chat. Don't read the screen yet. So cash is what? What is that phrase? Finish the sentence for me. Vanessa, cash is king, right? Anybody else? Rakita says trash. So you knew where I was going with this. So the famous phrase is cash is king, right? And as Grant says in the video that we just watched before, that is the old traditional mindset, maybe of our parents and the generation before our parents. Now we have the mindset, or should have the mindset, that cash is trash. And the reason why I say that is because if you hold on to your cash, over time, it actually devalues. So I know, like, my husband's from Israel, right? And they're very traditional, that they, not so much anymore, but they used to hide their cash and they'd stack it up, and you'd find it in, ceiling tiles and under the mattress and things like that. When in reality, if you've held on to that cash for the last 10, 20 years, it's actually devalued instead of appreciated. So how can we have our money not only work for us, but also appreciate in value? So use your money to 10x. What objections have you heard? Maybe some objections that you've heard of becoming a real estate investor. Maybe this is why you're not a real estate investor yourself, is that it's too risky, right? But we all know the saying that without risk, there's no reward. What I'm going to share with you today is how to have multiple exit strategies on any investment property that you purchase, allowing you to win every single time. Knock on wood. I don't have any wood around me to knock on, but my husband and I have never, ever lost on a flip property. And the reason why, it's not because things have not gone wrong. Trust me, they have. Things have come unexpected. But the reason why is because we always have multiple exit strategies and we're always willing to adapt, which I'll share with you in more detail. So as real estate agents, for the most part, maybe not all, we are commission-based because we want more. We want to change our life, our family's lives, the people that we love around us, our community, etc. So ask yourself, why are you in real estate? Why did you really originally get into real estate? To be your own boss, to be the CEO, to have unlimited, there with no ceiling on what you can do, financial freedom, like I said, financial time, location freedom. What is the reason why you originally got into real estate? You have an advantage as an agent to be a great investor. A lot of times we're getting access to off-market deals. We know the markets. We understand lending. We understand creative financing. We're finding deals. We're talking to people. We're already doing all the things that a good investor would do. So we should take advantage of that. And as a real estate agent, become an investor ourselves. It just takes a little bit of knowledge and the willingness to put in the work. So are you learning today for you, for your family, or for your clients? Some of you may say, hey, I never intend to be a real estate investor, and that's okay. Maybe you're just sharpening your skills for your clients, which I think is great. And then last on here is the 10X mindset. There's a great book actually by Grant Cardone, the 10X, and it talks about a lot of us set our goals and we set them within a threshold that we believe that we can reach. The reason for that is because if we set a goal so high that we can't reach that, then we're going to what? We're going to become disappointed in ourselves. And so we're willing to set something a little bit below the bar so we know and ensure that we can reach it and it's not anything that's unobtainable. Now, the 10X strategy is taking that goal. Let's say it's $100,000 a year for simplicity. You want to make $100,000 this year. That's your kind of safe zone. Let's 10X that. And let's say $1 million. Let's go after $1 million. If you can make $100,000 a year, I promise you, you can make $1 million. So let's 10X that. Let's figure out how to make $1 million. And what happens? Even if you don't make $1 million this year, but you go over 100,000, you make 200, 300, 400,000. You've gone well above and beyond what your original goal was. So always take your goal and think about how can I 10X it? Now, the other thing that we need to do from a mindset perspective is throw out the nonsense. So what are some common objections that you've heard that basically doesn't want you or stops you from becoming a real estate investor or maybe working with investors? Go ahead and put it in the chat. While you guys are doing that, we have 2 more classes at the end of the series next week. You don't have to attend all of them, but you get 2 hours of CE credit for each class that you attend and finish. So if you want to look at next week's schedule, I went ahead and put that in the chat. Okay, Liz said investors are hard to work with. Great.
Repeat your question for me. I'm sorry.
No problem. So Kenneth, my question was, what are some of the common objections that you've heard that have stopped you maybe from investing into real estate or working with investors? So far, Liz has said investors are hard to work with. So Rakita said, my experience has been time consuming and lots of low ball rejected offers. Vanessa, investors may be working with multiple realtors. Okay. Anybody else want to chime in? Just pricing of properties through COVID. I've worked with investors for years and prefer it. Okay, awesome. A lot of great feedback here. So definitely you have to think about investors, and instead of just being an investor yourself, you kind of have to put yourself in the mindset of an investor if you want to work with an investor. So one of the biggest common objections are investors are difficult. They're bad. They're greedy. They make lowball offers. They're just a waste of time, right? But if you think about yourself as an investor, if I'm an investor, when you truly understand the numbers and understand what's going to make sense, then you'll look at it from a different perspective. So people know that I'm a real estate investor, especially other agents that I work with, and they send us deals all the time. A lot of times they'll say, I have an amazing deal. They'll send it to me. I look at the numbers and I'm like, how anywhere? I mean, how did you even think that this was a good deal? Like, I have no idea. You're asking full price. It needs a lot of work. There's zero spread to be able to improve the property. And that's not even taking into consideration the closing cost to buy the property and of course, the closing cost to in turn sell the property. So that just goes to show me that agents don't understand the numbers. When you know the numbers and you know how to look for the good deals, you're now going to become a value add to those investors. And hopefully in turn, they won't start working with a bunch of other investors. So Rakita says, as a newer agent, I felt there's a lack of knowledge and experience on my part, like how to make sure numbers make sense. Well, that's where we are here today. So hopefully today will help. So guess what? Investors are the ones that bring properties back to life. I say this because I have heard many different times, investors are greedy. They just put lipstick on a pig and then they want to make this huge profit, right? Now, granted, not all investors are equal. So there are some that definitely just do a few cosmetic things and don't truly flip the property. But any good investor goes there and truly adds value to the property. So when you take a property that's been vacant for years and years and years, and it can't go conventional financing, maybe the appliances don't work, it needs new paint, the carpet's ripped up, etc. And somebody comes in and does all those things and now makes the property habitable, increases the comps, increases the value of the neighbors. Let me know, are they helping or are they hurting the market? Let's put it in the chat. Are they helping or are they hurting? Okay. A couple of you said helping. There we go. So we're all in agreement here that they're bringing properties back to life and they're helping the property. So they're not just helping the property, they're helping the entire neighborhood. One of my biggest pet peeves, and please, please never do this because this is one of the worst negotiation tactics that you can do, is when I would sell my investment properties and a buyer's agent comes to me and says, okay, well, we looked up, or then maybe they submitted an offer. Let's say it was, a pretty low offer. And, instead of getting, defensive, I always ask the buyer's agent, I'm curious, what comps did you pull to justify this offer? And I would always be able to tell somebody that was not educated, and when their response was they didn't pull comps, they basically looked at how much you bought the property for. And I'm like, okay, so we bought the property for X. We put X amount, we have X amount in closing costs. I don't know about you, but we don't work for free. And I don't think that you do either, right? So it's one of the worst negotiation tactics that you can do in negotiating on purchasing on behalf of a new buyer, is going to an investor and saying, I looked up the property and I saw you bought it for this. That is completely irrelevant. What's relevant is what the comps are, what the market is, and what has been done to the property. So it's okay to say that you want more. It's okay to flip a property and make a profit, because just like the rest of the world, investors deserve to make a profit too. Jessica said, one of the big investors in your area put lipstick on a pig kind of flipper. The properties are not good. These kind of people give flippers and investors a bad name to the public. I couldn't agree more. Like I said, investors are not all made equally. So today, hopefully I show you how to do it the right way. But you're right. Some people want to just go in and maybe paint the walls and call that a flip. So here's the thing with investing is, what I like about it is it's tangible asset. So you can touch it, you can feel it, you can control the outcome. Like I said, there is it's very, very important in any investment you ever purchase, and I'll give you some examples later on, that you have multiple exit strategies. I'm going to say this throughout the entire presentation because I'm going to drill it home today. Have multiple exit strategies because there's always going to be unforeseen circumstances. But the good thing about real estate investing, time and time again, is it's a tangible asset. And for them, if you do the numbers right, even in a down market, you can control the outcome. Unlike stock, unlike crypto, unlike these other things that are not tangible. Now, granted, I'm not saying don't do those things. I'm just explaining the difference. So real estate investing often has an outcome that's within your control from the skills that you've developed. Would you guys agree with that? So unlike other investments, real estate is tangible and typically appreciates over time. So again, properties typically appreciate. And then from a tax benefit, especially if you buy and hold, there's going to be a depreciation that you're allowed to do. So there's definitely a win-win all the way around. It's a great way to build retirement and build that financial freedom that I think many of us are looking for. So create a decent retirement by determining what passive income you need in order to live the life that you've always wanted to live. So I'm actually going to pull up this form real quick. I'm going to stop the screen share here for 1 second. I have a worksheet that I want to share with you guys. So we have a financial freedom worksheet. If you guys want a copy, I'm getting ready to share it with you. Go ahead and put your email in the chat and we will send it to you. Sorry guys, I should have already had this up. I just now thought about it. So if you guys want this financial freedom, how to figure out what your freedom number is, if you want this worksheet that I'm going to share with you here in a second, go ahead and put your email in the chat. Okay, going back to the screen share. All right, too many windows open here. Here we go. Okay, so what is a freedom number? A freedom number is creating passive income that is bigger than what your monthly expenses are. So let's say, for example, you add up all of your expenses, and this is the sheet that I'll share with you. So typical expenses, your mortgage, property taxes, your utilities, phone bill, car, if you have, a loan on your car, insurance, etc. So add all of these up. What are your typical expenses? And say, for the sake of example, it's $5,000 a month. So in order to hit financial freedom, you need to create passive income that's larger than $5,000 a month. So I'm just curious, put in the chat, you don't have to put the number, but put in the chat, how many of you know what your freedom number is? Just say yes or no. It's about 50-50. For those of you that don't, is this something that would be beneficial to you? Great. Awesome. Love it. So I would challenge you to, when I send this out later today, just take a few minutes, fill it out. I think it's always very important just in general, just in life in general, to know how, not only how much money is coming in, but more importantly, how much money is going out. And this will allow you to have something tangible that you can start working towards. So this is what I call the freedom number worksheet. So let's go back to the next slide. The 4 levels of real estate investing. So number 1, we have crowdfunding. 2, buy and hold, which are your lease properties. So you're going to hold them over a period of time and rent them out probably to a short-term or a long-term tenant. Flipping properties, so basically going in, fixing up the property, increasing the value for a profit. And then wholesale, which is essentially a signing of a contract. So just to get into each category a little bit further, but the 2 categories I'm going to, let's go back to the screen. So the 2 categories that I'm going to really focus on today is buy and hold and then flip. And the reason why is very rarely do I do crowdfunding or wholesaling on a personal level. So I don't really believe in teaching something that I don't personally do on a regular basis. So Crowdfunding, the practice of funding a project or venture by raising small amounts of money from a large number of people. So there's a lot of, people do this through kind of a smaller group, or you could do it even on a national or a global level. So I mentioned Grant Cardone earlier. He has basically a crowd fund where he goes and buys grade A type apartments, and you can invest, there might be a minimum to be able to become an investor. It's super passive. They take care of all the management. They take care of everything. And then you're going to get a percentage. If they sell the property, then you might get a percentage also when they sell the property. So you'll get a monthly cash flow as well as a percentage when they sell the property. So this is super hands off. This is great for people that, don't want to have their hands dirty, or maybe they're physicians, or, they're busy in life and they're doing other things, but they have extra capital. Then crowdfunding might be a great way for them to invest. Buy and hold, a contract by which party conveys land, property, or services to another for a specified time, usually in return for a periodic payment. So typically speaking, this have been long-term rentals, about 12 months or more. I know for us, all of our rentals are 12 months. Of course, the short-term rentals are becoming more and more popular, things like VRBO and Airbnb. But what I've read lately is that even the Airbnb market is definitely on the decline, because as there have become more Airbnbs and things in certain markets, which is going to drive the prices down. So a lot of short-term rentals are actually now converting to long-term rentals. Personally, I have done the numbers to convert my long-term rentals into short-term rentals. And once you start looking at cleaning fees and management fees, and just the headache of having people come in and out of the property, having to furnish the property, et cetera, and then it added, liability insurance, I haven't found that you make a lot more money than you do in short term. But again, that can vary definitely from market to market. So there is some opportunity. So just consider, if you're going to do buy and hold, are you going to do short term or long term? And of course, if you're going to do short term, make sure that it's compliant with your HOA and community guidelines. Flip is a type of real estate investment strategy in which an investor purchases a property with the goal of reselling them for a profit. As I mentioned, hopefully you're doing more than just putting lipstick on a pig, and you're actually increasing the value, you're making it habitable, but also without going over budget, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. There is a fine line of also understanding the numbers and knowing when to stop on a property, right? Because we also can't change everything. For example, if the heat and air system is working, if the hot water tank is working, maybe it's not new, then just keep it. You don't need to go and change it if it's still working, if it's still in good working order, just have it serviced. Because if you want to sit there and change everything, even if it's in good working condition, then that's going to decrease your profit. And that's where a lot of people actually go over budget. Wholesale is where a real estate wholesaler contracts for a home, markets the home for potential buyers, and then assigns the contract for a buyer. Luckily in Oklahoma, saw this as an issue because there has been a lot of red flags and gray areas in the past with wholesaling. So Oklahoma does require that wholesalers become licensed agents now, which I'm glad for on a personal level. Some of you may disagree with me, but the reason why is I believe as real estate agents, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our clients. And when we're going to somebody, we shouldn't just lowball it. We should let them know, here's what your property's worth as is. I can buy it from you today at this price, or you can fix it up, invest, put it on the open market, and here's what it would be. But we need to give them options instead of just going in, contracting at a low price, and then not even having the intention, more importantly, never having the intention to ever close, basically putting earnest money down and then assigning the contract. I say that because there's so many real estate investing conventions out there that are teaching people how to become a real estate investor for $500 or $1,000. And honestly, I think that's the wrong way. What it's teaching people is to go contract on homes, put the earnest money down, go find a new buyer, assign the contract, which is okay. What I have a problem with is they never have the intention of ever purchasing the property. So if I've ever wholesaled a deal, it's because I have the end in mind, and I also have the intent, if I don't assign it to another buyer, then I still have the means to purchase the property. Does that make sense? Any feedback on wholesaling or anything else we've talked about so far? So Liz, the question was, what is the ballpark rate of return on crowdfunding? It definitely varies. I've seen it go anywhere from 6, 8, 9%, but it definitely varies on the project.
Sure.
I have one that's not, I have properties in other states that are not necessarily crowdfunding, but they're hands-off investments. Meaning basically we buy the property, then we sell it, we become the lender. And those are bringing about on average an 8% return. The good thing about
Okay.
that is they're completely hands-off. I don't do anything as far as management.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Any questions so far or feedback on anything that we've discussed? Okay. So how do you get started? Big question of the day. First, you have to find a niche and strategy. If I get 10 investors on the call today, and I ask every single person, what is your niche? What is your market? What's your ideal property? Everybody's going to have a different strategy. I know some, oh, Liz, if you don't mind, I think if you can mute your mic. Oh, here, I just requested. There we go. Perfect. So, for me, we did a few in the historic area in Oklahoma City, but that was not my niche and strategy. And to be honest with you, it was not something I'm passionate about. Now I have agents that I work with that's all they do is work with historic homes, and they're very passionate about renovating and kind of restoring things, right? So you have to find out what works for you and what you're passionate about doing. So first thing you start with, number one, is price range. What's the price range that you're comfortable in getting started? We've worked anywhere from our first investment, which was probably our lowest flip, was $25,000, all the way up to properties that are worth $2 million. So we've done a wide range. I would say when we worked in Oklahoma City, we really tried to stay there right in that median price point of about $200,000 because that has the biggest buyer pool. Neighborhoods and areas for me, and for my husband, because my husband basically was the general contractor. We tried to find neighborhoods that were within about a 30-minute radius of where we live. So although we lived in Edmond, although we could have definitely found deals in Moore and Norman and Yukon and all these other places, primarily we focused on Oklahoma City and Edmond because that way he could manage multiple projects at any given time. Are you going to rent or are you going to flip the house? So anytime we would walk through a house, we would ask ourselves, is this going to be a good rent or is this going to be a good flip? And then vice versa, if you try to flip it and it doesn't sell, can you rent it for how much? Does that still make sense? Remodeling budget. This is really, really key to make sure that you don't go over budget. So we could walk into any house just because of the experience that we got over years. And I'll tell you how we got that experience. Is we could tell exactly how much money we were going to spend on that flip. And 9 times out of 10, we were almost to the penny. We would know how much money. We very rarely ever went over budget because we would add a little bit of a buffer. And how we did that is, some of you might be saying, well, I don't know prices. I don't know how much tile is. I don't know how much installation is. I don't know how much appliances are. We would spend our evenings and weekends, as silly as it sounds, walking through the aisles of Home Depot and Lowe's and just learning the prices as we were getting started. That was very much our family trip. Every evening, every weekend was to Lowe's and just walking up and down the aisles, meeting with contractors, knowing how much installations cost. And then over time, as you start to create your own crews, you're going to know how much they charge you. Aside from like professionals and as far as like electricians and plumbers, tile installations, for example, instead of paying by the square foot, we would pay them by the day or by the week. We could say, okay, this house is going to take 2 weeks. We know exactly how long it's going to take. How much money do you want to make for the project as opposed to charging by square foot? So strategic vendor partnerships, it's incredibly important to start creating those partnerships. If you're not going to be the general contractor yourself, if you don't have that experience, then make sure that you're working with somebody that either that you trust, or maybe other real estate agents have worked with. What is the return on investment? So when we look at ROI and ROT, which is return on time, of course, you're doing this. We've already established we're doing this to make a profit. So how much are you willing to make for the time allotted? And I was asked this question all the time. How much money do you want to make on any given project? And I would say, honestly, it varies. I think the lowest amount that we ever made on a flip was $15,000. And we've made over $1 million on flips. But you have to look on how much money did I have to invest and how much time. So if I have maybe a smaller property that I can be in and out in a couple of weeks, I might be willing to make a little bit less because I know that I can turn it a lot faster than obviously a bigger project. So always look on return on investment and return on time. As the longer that you hold a property, if you're going to take 6 to 12 months to flip a property, there's going to be holding cost. It costs you every single day that you own that house. So the faster that you can get in and out, we had about a 30-day rule of thumb and a 90-day rule of thumb as far as buying and selling. So we would buy the property, 30 days to fix it up, 30 days to go under contract, and then 30 days to close. So we would try to not own a property for any more than 90 days. But that meant that we had to have a plan. We had to have our contractors lined up, and we had to get in there and get out because we knew that time was money. As we've talked about in the other classes, is build a roadmap to success. Know exactly where you're going. Try to envision it and create realistic expectations. Vanessa asked, how much easier was it for you that your husband partner is your GC? It's one of the most important parts. So I know people that do it multiple different ways. I mean, I definitely know investors that are hands-on like we are. And then I know investors that hardly ever walk into the property. For us, because we were our own GC, obviously we would make a little bit more because we weren't having to pay the general contractor. But if you don't have the time or the knowledge to do that, then you could definitely hire it out. You just have to add that within your budget. Did that answer your question, Vanessa, or something else you'd like me to expand on? So create realistic expectations. You know, you can't think that you're going to walk in and make $100,000 on your first flip. Of course, it can happen, but we want to set realistic expectations and then know what the market is giving us. By the way, when we were evaluating any property, I would pull comps multiple times throughout the process. I would pull comps before we ever made an offer on the property. If we contracted on the property, I would pull comps again after we closed on the property to see if comps had varied. So that way we could finalize our budget and how much we were going to spend. And then of course, pull comps again right before we're putting it up for sale. The reason why I say that, and you guys are all real estate agents here, so you know that the market can vary over 90 days. Am I right? So sometimes one or two comps, one or two houses that have sold in the neighborhood could drastically change up or down how much you're going to be able to sell that property for. I know there's properties multiple times that I've pulled comps and then all of a sudden the neighbor has sold and I've been able to list the house for $10,000 more than I originally thought just because the comps had justified that. So pull comps, my point in saying all this is pulling comps multiple times throughout the process. Creative financing, cash. Of course, if you have cash, it's been a real estate's always been a proven instrument. Investment over time and most likely bring you a higher return than your savings account. We already talked about that cash is trash. You're most likely, if done right, going to get a higher return on buying and holding or flipping property as opposed to just saving your money. Now, some of you may be saying, okay, I don't have the cash, which is fine. We all get started somewhere. Then you have to look at leverage or line of credit. So you can leverage your banking partnerships and build your real estate empire without using your own money. Of course, most of them are going to require a percentage down. Maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20%. And then they'll be able to look at the deal, make sure that it makes sense and be able to fund the deal. And I say that at any time that you ever go to a bank, always show them your business plan, how much money you're going to buy the property for, how much money it's going to cost to fix it up, and then how you're going to make that return. So if the deal makes sense, most of the time they're going to fund you, even if you're not able to put a big percentage down, or you could even look at hard money lenders. Of course, hard money lenders typically are going to charge a bit higher as far as interest rates. So you have to make sure that's within your budget. And then another option is line of credit. Those are developed over time, but once established can be a great resource of available funds. The philosophy that we have always used, whether it's right or wrong, it's personal preference, is we would work hard to pay off our real estate single family homes instead of just putting 20% down and then leveraging over 15, 20, 30-year amortization, we would pay off our single family and then take what's called a revolving line of credit against those houses. So let's say you have 10 houses for that are all free and clear that are paid for. You can take those 10 properties to a bank, ask for 70, 75%, 80% with a 1-year lock, and ask them to give you a revolving line of credit. So let's say, for example, those 10 properties for, simplicity are worth $1 million. They might give you $700,000 to $800,000 as a revolving line of credit. That's basically cash that's available to you at any given time to refinance. So or to any given time to reinvest. So it's almost like having cash on hand. So now you've got all these investments that are making you money. And then you now have money that's available to you to invest more. Now, the reason why I say this is you could buy, instead of the 10 properties, you could buy 50 properties and only put 20% down, but now your monthly cash flow is significantly decreased. And then you can't take a line of credit because you already have a loan on those properties. So everybody has their own strategy to this. I'm only sharing with you kind of what our strategy is. Now, that definitely takes time to build. What we would do as we flipped properties and made a profit, instead of pulling that profit or living off of that profit, we would just pay down our line of credit and then reinvest that profit back into the properties. Does that make sense? Do we have any questions here?
I do.
Sure. Yes, Tony.
Micah, the example that you just gave for the 10 properties, do you have to refinance, or is there any, or how is it like HELOC, for example, for a primary residence, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's similar to a HELOC. So basically what they will do, as a matter of fact, I just changed my bank. And so I renewed my line of credit like 2 months ago. So I just went through the process again. It's definitely important always to shop around, because they're definitely banks vary. So what the process for me was, you give them a list of properties, they will do usually a drive-by appraisal. And so once they do the appraisal, they'll say, for example, I'll give you 80 or 75% on the dollar, right? So they'll give you 75%. Then you have to give them all the title commitments, basically making sure that you have clear title. And then there's actually a closing process. So just like you're closing on a home, so you're putting those properties up for collateral. And then as you're putting those properties up for collateral, those funds become available to you. Things to look at if you decide to do this and you want to kind of interview different banks. I always recommend look at 10 different banks. Don't just look at 1 or 2. Number 1, what are the response times? Number 2, what's the percentage that they're willing to give you as far as, what the value is versus the loan? And then also number 3, what are the fees? And the most important one is, what is the interest rate and how long are they willing to lock that interest rate? Some of them are going to do a fluctuating interest rate. I'm always looking for a 1 or a 2-year lock. So, I just renewed my line of credit. It went from a 4% interest to an 8% interest, but I still had a 4% interest because I had a 2-year lock. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Great question. Anybody else want to add to this or any other questions?
I have another question though.
Yeah.
So when like the HELOC, I have HELOC on my house right now. So I have an account. So if I don't use the money, I don't spend it. I don't pay a penny. But whatever I use from that money, this is what I'm paying interest on, and it's locked for 10 years. Now, is it the same, or is it whenever you get approved for the funds, you're going to stop paying money whether you use these funds or not?
No, any line of credit that I've ever been affiliated or associated with has been, you just pay interest only on the funds that you use. So remember when I mentioned that we would just reinvest. So as we would sell a flip, we would take those funds, pay down the line of credit, and then reinvest. And that's how we built it up to where we had properties that were eventually free and clear because we never pulled from that money. So how the line of credit is set up is you're only paying the interest on the funds that you actually use. So
Okay.
you could set up a line of credit. Like I didn't use my line of credit at all for the last year. So it didn't cost me anything other than the annual fees.
Okay. And the closing costs, you said it's going to be, there's no closing costs, right? I mean, you said there is some closing
There
costs.
are some closing costs, and that's going to vary bank to bank. So I definitely would ask as you're interviewing for a line of credit, is what are those, what are those fees going to be? The reason why I switched banks was number one, because this bank was easier to deal with. Number two, because they were willing to give me 80% instead of 70% on the value. And then number three, the appraisals and the closing costs were significantly lower. So it just made sense for me to make the change.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great questions. Anybody else?
What bank did you switch to?
I'm sorry, Kenneth, what was that question?
What bank did you switch to?
I just switched to Shamrock Bank. I just switched to them because they're actually the bank that I also use for my commercial real estate. And I didn't even realize they did line of credits until I asked them. And if you guys need a contact, just message me privately. I'd be happy to hook you up with my loan officer. I've worked with them for several years now and they've been fantastic. I've been really impressed with them.
I have a question.
Yes, hey, Jessica.
So my husband, the current flip was his first flip, so he has used his own money. And because he's been doing this for the last 6 to 8 months, he can't show like an income. So how do you find what programs are available out there for people like him who can't show an income or don't have that money coming in while he's using his own money to do this kind of thing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And to be honest with you, Jessica, I can only speak from personal experience is we would never live off of our investments. We would definitely have multiple streams of income because our investments was like the long-term portfolio that we would just continually to reinvest, right? But we had other income coming in terms of like being a real estate agent and other things that we do. So, actually Isaac, I just saw our sponsor, Isaac Rice, is on here and he's with Mission Loans. He might be able to give us some ideas actually on this topic. Isaac, are you available?
I am. Can you hear
Awesome.
me?
So, yeah, thanks, Isaac, for jumping in. So we're talking about real estate investing today and some of the options, as agents either think about becoming investors themselves or even representing clients that are investors. So maybe you can, from a finance standpoint, give us some pointers and a little bit about what you guys do.
Sure, you bet. So I've only been on here about 5 minutes or so, but a lot of what you were answering questions about and telling them, Micah, is kind of another side of the banking world or the lending world that I'm not really a part of, but is a huge piece of scaling a real estate investment, business, is having key relationships with what I would call commercial lenders or banks that are going to be able to create a product or offer a product to a borrower that's kind of tailored to them and that they get to make their own rules because they're going to hold that debt in their portfolio. So portfolio loans, another word you might call it too, but a lot of those commercial type lending products will be based upon the property's ability to create income. And, or a debt service coverage ratio loan. I have access to some DSCR loans. Typically, they're not going to be as beneficial as somebody who has multiple banking contacts, just smaller banks, and you develop relationships with them. That's a big key thing. And when I heard you say talk to 8 or 10 of them, I think that's a really good idea as it relates to trying to scale a residential real estate business. I'm more on the other side. I do finance investment properties, but when I do those in they're like a traditional type of a way, the same rules that apply to buying a primary residence, as far as if it's Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac underwritten, if it's for a mortgage that is going to be sold on the secondary market, which is way more than 90% of most mortgages for residential property, they will be sold. And that is my company sells our loans. But if you got to play by the rules of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, you got to have, ability to repay is a big one, the big thing that we have to look at. And there's rules on how we calculate it. Some of that is qualifying income. So what you were asking, Jessica, it sounds like for that type of loan, if he may be trying to get a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac underwritten loan, if he doesn't have that self-employment income, 2 years history based on tax returns that you can use to qualify, then you'd probably need to look at a different type of financing for, like a portfolio loan at a bank where they may judge the merits of the borrower's ability to repay more based on history of having done so, or the property's ability to cash flow and all that stuff. So that's a really good question, but in general, in my side of the world, if it's a regular loan, the ability to repay is a big part, and anything that's self-employment, overtime, bonus, commission to 99, that stuff typically be counted properly, does have to be demonstrated over 2 years. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and I think Jessica just added a question in the chat. Can we go off last year's and the previous for the self-employment income?
That is typically what it always diverts to, or goes back to the most recent 2 years. Yeah, so now if the business has changed, then that makes a difference. So if it was the previous 2 years and those 2 years of tax returns or in business, the actual financial statements, whatever we may be basing that off of, if that was for an entirely different business or a different, an established thing, and what's going on now is a new thing, then what happened in the past wouldn't matter. But if this is a continuance of this doing the same business, then yes, that would work. But or if it was a different business, but you still do that one too. If it's something that is still an enterprise for you and it is still an income stream, and your year to date, receipt of revenue for doing that business is in line or is pacing similarly to the previous 2 years, then you bet we can use that. But there's a lot of if-then scenarios in the traditional mortgage lending side of the world. And I think maybe even you guys could get this from just the brief me answering these questions. Having relationships with people that get to make their own rules is a really big deal when it comes to residential real estate, because the true idea of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were to subsidize housing costs in the United States. And we're one of the few countries in the world that does that. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, those entities that are guaranteed to purchase debt if you follow the rules, they were not created for people to make money. They were created for people to save money. So that's kind of why I think strategic relationships with commercial bankers are such a huge deal. I know a lot of my personal friends that have, done that and scaled their residential real estate holdings could not have possibly done it by just using traditional means alone. So I think having, exploring a lot of different options is a really good idea. More of what I do is help people buy a home to live in, but I also do a lot of investment properties. I just got to follow the typical rules for ability to repay on those.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Isaac. Does anybody have any questions while Isaac is still on here? Like you said, he's more of a traditional loan officer, but he's our sponsor. Obviously, we're offering these CE classes, this particular series, for free to real estate agents right now. And it's thanks to Isaac at Mission Loans. So we definitely appreciate you. And he's great, especially as you're working with your clients. So a lot of great advice. Any questions for Isaac? Great. Isaac, would you mind putting your contact information in the chat for us?
Not a bit. I will drop it in there. Thank you.
Thank you. So Isaac mentioned something that was really key just now, was in those banking relationships, it's a lot about who you know and really the magnitude of their decision making. So for example, the bank that I switched from my line of credit to the bank that I'm working with now was because the bank that I'm working with now, the representative that I work with is like the president of the board. And he literally, aside from getting it approved, makes the decisions. So when I talk to him about an idea or something, he pretty much can tell me on the spot if he can do it or not. The previous bank, although it was a fantastic bank that I was working with, the challenge was everything had to get run through bank committees, which, they typically meet like once a month or every other week at minimum. And so then we would always have to be waiting for our answer. Whereas this other bank, I can just call. He knows us. He knows how well diversified we are. He knows kind of because of our working relationship over the last few years, how we operate. And so we've built that trust. You have to build that trust with that partner. Also, any bank that you go to, in terms of a private bank for leverage or a line of credit, they're going to ask, in my experience, they're going to ask for a financial statement. So if you already have that on hand, that's going to be super helpful. You can simply Google financial statement. There's a million of them out there, or they might give you a template. A lot of them will have a template on hand. But if you're interviewing 10 different banks, just have a financial statement that you can send them initially, and you can see what those terms are. So when you're looking at the financial statement, they're going to look at how well diversified you are. Do you own real estate investments? Do you have property? Do you have equity in the property? Do you have money in the bank? Do you have stocks? Do you have bonds? Do you have life insurance? All these different things. Do you have vehicles? All these different things are going to go into basically a P&L statement. So for anything, I think, Vanessa, you asked, what do you recommend is the best way to fund or finance your first investment property? Our first investment was only $25,000. So we saved up to basically purchase that investment. I'll share with you on the second part of this class. But for those of you that might have a deal and you don't quite have the cash saved up, there are hard money lenders out there. Personally, I've never used a hard money lender, but I know people that have, and definitely for like 6 months. So you just have to run the numbers, because they typically do charge higher interest rates. You have to run the numbers and make sure that that makes sense. Do we have any more questions on this topic? Great. So we've already briefly touched on, I'm going to share with you guys this freedom number sheet, but basically, what is your freedom number? How much passive income do you need in order to allow yourself to become a full-time real estate investor? Basically add up all your expenses to determine your monthly residual income and your return on investment. So all great stuff. We're here past the top of the hour. I'm going to go ahead and call for a 10-minute break. So if we can be back here at 12:16, and we will have to put something in the chat to make sure that you're here. So let's go ahead and take a quick 10-minute break. All right, so some of the tax benefits. Now, of course, you want to ask your accountant, because full disclaimer, I am not a tax professional, but this is just my personal experience. So that the tax benefits are, as I kind of touched on briefly, appreciation, and then of course, depreciation and deductions. So the market's going to fluctuate over time. If purchased at the right price, then your property should hopefully appreciate over value. And then what happens is you can if you're buying and holding, so flipping is in a different story. But if you're buying and holding on the property, then you can depreciate it year over year. And then of course, any expenses that you use on the property or business expenses, you can also deduct as deductions. So definitely ask your accountant and see what makes the most sense, because that is a determining factor besides the property itself. Whether we hold a property, if we're going to sell it, or if we're going to flip it, is also kind of where we are in that tax year as far as what the tax liability would be. Also, we're not really going to touch into this too much in depth, but if you're flipping property, you can definitely reach out to me. I'll give you my contact information toward the end. I have a great 1031 tax intermediary, meaning if you plan on not pulling out any funds and just continuing to reinvest, you can do what's called a 1031 tax exchange and buy a like property for a similar price or greater. And then you would basically be deferring that tax liability and not having to pay any capital gains. So there's definitely a lot of benefits to that, especially as you're starting to do projects where there's quite a bit of capital gain. Then that's going to help you as far as the overall tax. A lot of people are intimidated by 1031 tax exchanges just because of all the timeframes and things, the criteria that you have to meet. My personal experience with the intermediary that I work with is they're fantastic. They make it super easy to put all the funds in escrow, to set everything up for closing. They basically handle it for you. You just got to connect them with your closing company. Make sure you do it before you're closing on the property. And then also they remind you of all the timelines that you've got to keep up with. So actually, one of my agent partners called me last week, and because I'd given her my intermediary and she's now flipping properties, she's done 3 1031 tax exchanges this year. So definitely something to take into consideration. So buy and hold, here's a couple of different options that you can do. And some of this I'm going to go through pretty quickly just for the sake of time. Is purchase with cash. Obviously, that one's pretty self-explanatory, but if you're wanting more of the residual income from the cash you already have on hand, meaning the monthly cash flow, then purchase property, pay with cash. Obviously, that's going to be more money for you on a monthly cash flow. Investing in real estate rentals are a great resource. Now, there's other options aside from just paying full in cash is a down payment. You could pay off your rentals quicker, place a larger down payment, and then of course, shorten the life of your loan. Or you've got your typical amortization, place a lower down payment, pay off your debt over the life of the loan. So for example, if you buy 5 properties and $100,000 with a 30-year fixed loan, then if you lease each property for $1,000 a month, then you're approximately making $5,000 a month. Now, what you want to take into consideration if you're getting a loan is, of course, what's the principal interest, what are the taxes, insurance, and then of course, any other holding fees. So that's something you definitely want to take into consideration because it will happen. The heat and air will break, the hot water tank will break. You'll need to pay an insurance deductible because your roof would get damaged. I think we had 1 month, we had 9 hot water tanks break all at the same time in one of our apartment complexes. So you definitely have to be prepared for those type of things. And that's where I'm a little bit leery of the people that are doing a smaller cash flow on a monthly basis, maybe $200 or $300 a month, because one major repair for that year would wipe out any cash flow that they're getting for the rest of the year. So here's just an example. This is a picture of a flip that we actually did years ago in Edmond. And, oh, Tony, I see you have a question on the 1031.
Hey, Micah, the 1031 exchange, as far as I'm understanding from other investors, that you cannot do that on investment properties. It's only on primary residence.
No,
Is that?
it's actually meant for investment properties.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So primary residence, if you're going to flip a primary residence, and of course, again, seek counsel from your tax accountant, but we have flipped almost every house that we've personally lived in. And in the US, not in Puerto Rico where I live now, but unfortunately, but in the US, if you live there over 2 years, then there's a breakage point as far as capital gains on a personal residence. But for investment properties, 1031 would be on the way to go. Jessica, are you going to touch on opportunity zones? No, not so much for this class, just because this is more of a 101, but we could definitely touch on that on a later date. So here's a quick example of one of the investments, like I said, that we did in Edmond. So you can see the original kitchen. Again, we're not just putting lipstick on a pig. I mean, we're actually we're fully changing out the entire kitchen, right? Cabinets, backsplash, appliances, rearranging even how the kitchen flow is. So you can see here, we changed the electric stove to a gas stove, the dishwasher, the sink. We opened up this a little bit just to make it more connected with the living room. Of course, you want to check with engineering guidelines and all those different things, but you can just see it's much more warm and welcoming than this picture. Same thing with this bathroom. There was one sink, it did not have the double sinks, but it definitely had the space for the double sinks. So instead of doing this awkward like L-shaped cabinet, we just did double sinks on one side of the wall and just made it feel a lot more open. Especially as your real estate agent, you're walking through a lot of properties. One of the best things that I would do to see the latest trends is to walk through new construction. What type of light fixtures are builders using, what type of colors? Go to Sherwin-Williams, go to Kelly Moore, go to these paint companies and ask them what are the top 10 color palette right now. And so definitely you can look through a lot of new construction and then, different apps and things like that to see the latest trends. Always want to think about maximizing your space. Number one, what is your budget? Like I said, there is a fine balance between what's the budget to improve the property to add value, but also you can't be expected to change everything as the investor because at some point you just have to stop in order for it to make sense. Determine the best use of the space. How do you improve the property without going over appraised value? That's why it's important to check comps multiple times throughout the process, because that's how you're going to stick with that. As I said, if the hot water tank is working, if the heat and air is working, there's no need to change those type of things. Maybe I would recommend offering a home warranty, have it inspected, have it serviced, make sure it's properly working. But if it's working, it's not to be expected to be a brand new unit. Pull similar, remodeled, and recent sold. So when you look at comps, Obviously, you want to look at comps, everything that's sold in the area, but also try to pull comps that are updated to the level that you plan on updating your flip. Of course, what is the time frame? This is key. If you're going to do a house, if you're going to flip it in 90 days, or are you going to do it in 6 months or 12 months? Because the longer you hold the property, of course, there's holding costs such as utilities, taxes, insurance, and mortgage payments. Wholesale, in my opinion, the method of wholesaling is best used when they're not licensed real estate agents, but now, of course, this is, nationwide, but in Oklahoma, they do require them to be licensed right now. The investor contracts on a property for little money down and assigns it to a buyer. Be caution of dual contracting. Again, that's a big no-no. The average income, it could be more, it could be less, on a wholesale deal is about $3,000 to $5,000. It is a 25-to-1 ratio, meaning you've got to write 25 offers to contract on one house. So it is very much kind of a numbers game. So I mentioned I was going to tell you guys how we got started, how we flipped our first property. And believe it or not, our first flip of $20,000 to $5,000 was 2 lots. If you're familiar with Edmond, they were in the Faircloud edition. And what happened was, you have to project into the world what you want to do, right? So we started letting everybody know that we wanted to flip properties. Well, what we came across these 2 lots, and the individual, it was December. We were actually at a Christmas party for my previous brokerage that I was with. And my broker came up to me and said, I've got these 2 lots. They're owned by the bank. The bank just wants to get them off their books. Go make an offer. And so when I talked about earlier in setting realistic expectations, I had told that individual exactly how much money I had to work with. Instead of trying to boast and be unrealistic, I could have said, oh, I'm looking for a property for $100,000. Mind you, this was 10 years ago. But at the time, I didn't have $100,000 to work with. I had $25,000. So you've got to set those expectations. That way people are bringing you the right deals. And so because he knew what I was dealing with and he knew that the bank wanted to get these lots off his books, he thought it'd be a perfect fit. So it had been on the market for 2 years. And we're like, okay, how do you flip lots? Before reading the rest of it, how would you guys flip 2 lots? How can you improve a piece of land? And by the way, we've done several lots since then. Any guesses?
You could purchase and install like the utility taps.
Awesome. Love it. Great idea. Anybody else? Liz said clean them up, mow the lawn. Clean up. Okay, great. Well, yes, you guys are right. Step number 1 was clean up. But here's the catch. I didn't even have money to clean up the lots, to hire somebody to come remove all the brush. So I found somebody that was willing to come and remove all the brush and the trees for mulch. He wanted to use the remaining trees for his mulching company. So I was like, hey, I think it was like $500. I'll give you $500 to clear it out, and then you can have any mulch. So of course he did it at a lower price. So you have to get a little bit creative. The other thing that we found were these 2 lots were very narrow in the front. So if you guys know the Faircloud edition, they build pretty good size homes in that edition, but the front of it was kind of a pie shape. So it was very narrow. So we went to the city and we said, what if we combine these 2 lots to 1 lot? That way somebody could build a large home and then have a large circular driveway. So I went to the city, I had them replatted as 1 lot, which was actually fairly simple process. And then we sold it within 6 months for $50,000. So with barely putting any money and time into it, we were able to double our money just by getting a little bit creative and being open to some different ideas and selling it within less than 6 months. So again, you have to look at the market, look at the neighborhood, look at what's selling, and then think to yourself, why is this property not selling? So basically that was the big deciding factor. Now, here's what we did. We took that $50,000. Instead of getting excited that we've just made $25,000, we went and invested that $50,000 into a small investment property in War Acres, fixed it up, flipped it, sold it the first weekend. I don't think we even made it to the open house for $90,000. Okay. Now what did we do? Instead of spending the money on that $90,000 and getting excited and blowing it, we reinvested that 90 into another property and sold that property for 150. Do you guys see that linear projection of how we turn that 25 into 150 in the first year by what is that, like 4 different flips without pulling the money out and just continuing to reinvest. Does that make sense? Yep, Tony, I see you have a question.
Yeah, Micah, sorry, I keep interrupting regarding the taxes thing. So you invested 25,000, you sold it for 50,000. So to take it step by step, the $50,000, so did you have to pay taxes on the 25,000? Or did you do a 1031 exchange because you bought another property for 50 and you sold it for 90? So can you tell me a little bit about the taxes? How did you deal with that?
Sure. Yeah. So for that particular year, I was not familiar for 1031s at the time. So we did pay any capital gains tax. As I got more experienced and more aware, we started to do more and more 1031 tax exchanges.
Okay, thank you very much.
And it's really just a matter of asking your CPA. So I'll give you guys just a quick example, but for the sake of time, I want to keep this quick. So in Puerto Rico, where I live now, they changed the law where if it's a personal residence, you can't get the capital gains benefit on your personal residence. So then I just started researching and asking our accountant, asking attorneys, just asking around, how can we reduce our tax liability when we sell our personal home? Because we're going to make probably $800,000 or more on our personal home, which at 35%, that's a pretty big tax benefit. So I'm not saying don't pay taxes. I'm just saying, how can you reduce that liability? So what I found just by asking questions is here we can put the property in an LLC, in an entity, and then basically sell that entity and be able to significantly reduce the tax liability. So again, my only reason in saying that is just always be willing to ask people, ask other investors, ask your CPAs, ask your accountants, ask your attorneys, and just be willing to be open-minded because there's always a solution. And just, of course, I think we're all in agreement that we want to pay taxes, but of course, if we can lower that liability a little bit, then we can obviously do more investment properties. So some different types of investment properties, of course, single family. They often have the most competition. So just be mindful of that. Typically the safest investment for a new investor, and tenants take the best care of their homes. Anytime you get upwards of 4 units for the sake of like insurance and different things like that, it's considered commercial. When you start getting into duplexes, triplex, fourplex, and then other multifamily larger complexes, there's less competition. And what's nice about the multifamily world is they're usually under the same roof. So same roof. If you need to send somebody out to, instead of going to 10 different properties, they're going to the same property to service the heat and air units, the hot water tanks, etc. And then of course, apartments and commercial, there are good deals with apartments and commercial, but they're hard to find. But when you find a good one, they can be highly profitable. Typically less overhead and repairs. The reason why I say that is the game with multifamily apartments, commercial is not only just about the monthly cash flow, but unlike residential, single family residential, where it's really determined about the market and local comps, commercial is more about what is the cash flow. So you could take a commercial property that's making X amount, and if you can find a way to double the income, you've now doubled the value of the property because there's more return on investment for potentially the new buyer, because they're going to look at cap rates. So I'll give you guys some examples here in just a little bit and see how much time I have. How to find distressed properties. Of course, you've got your typical MLS searches, but don't rely just on the MLS because that's of course what everybody else is doing. I have myself still set up on an MLS search, so I get notified as soon as something hits the market. But of course, you want to be a little more creative than that, make strategic relationships with short sale experts, with foreclosure agents. Of course, every county has an auction, probate attorneys, and then even wholesalers. So however you feel on wholesalers, the fact of the matter is sometimes they do come across really good deals. So there's always a lot of investor meetups. Start going to those investor meetups. If you look at Eventbrite, there's always investor meetups going on in any given market, and start creating relationships with wholesalers. Ask them to put you on their list. I have one of our agent partners in Tulsa. A few months ago, she just bought a storage unit, killer of a deal, because of a wholesaler that gave her kind of that lead. So I do have 101 ways to make money in real estate investing. I don't normally offer this up for free, but my husband and I wrote a book years ago. It's called Embrace Your Fear, which is the real estate investing formula. So I'm going to share with you guys a free copy just for, you can see at the very end, there's 101 ways to invest in real estate. So I will share that with you guys. Just please don't share it out because that's only going to be for the people that attend today. All right, so here's another flip example. So again, this was years ago, so prices have changed. So kind of ignore the prices, but you definitely get the gist. If I purchase this property for $55,000 and my total renovation cost is going to cost me $20,000 to fix it up. And then of course I need to factor in for 6 months, utilities, taxes, insurance, any mortgage payments. Let's say that's $5,000. So now my total investment is $80,000. Let's say I put it on the market, I sell it for $105,000. My closing costs are $5,000. Now I can see that I make a $15,000 profit, right? So you can just see these are actual pictures of investments that we've done in the past. I always had my home staged because I definitely feel like that helps increase the value as well. All right, so here's just another flip example. You can see just another photo. You can see very similarly, we did similar styles almost in every house. You don't have to make every house completely unique. If you're getting a good deal at Lowe's on a certain floor and it works with every house, use the same tile, use the same flooring. And then of course, use the same stager. So you'll see there's some similar themes in all of our investments. So here's another example when I talked about having multiple exit strategies. So here's one where we purchased this house in Edmond for $130,000. Initially, we did repairs for $10,000. We were going to flip it, but as we were going to flip it, the market kind of shifted and it was not moving as quick as we wanted. So we didn't do a major renovation, just knowing that the market was shifting. So instead, we kind of just fixed it up to make it livable. So instead of being able to flip it, we then rented it for $1,400 a month. And then of course the aftermarket value was, or the after repair value was $170,000. So there was a $30,000 gain when you take into consideration what we purchased it for, the repairs. So I was renting it for $1,400 a month. And then until the market came back, then I was able to sell it for the $170,000. So I was able to get monthly cash flow as well as sell it for a few years later. So you have to kind of adjust on some different things. Now here's an improvement example. So this was a commercial shopping center that we purchased years ago for $350,000. At the time, it was 80% occupied and rented extremely cheap for $6 a square foot plus CAM, common area maintenance fees. Now, the reason why it was rented so cheap was because the original owner who had built it had just never increased the prices since the 80s when he originally built it. He just didn't want to deal with it. So he sold it to us. In 2 years, we were able to change it from an 80% occupancy to 100% occupancy. We put about $40,000 in exterior improvements. We increased the rent from $6 to $9 and then sold it 2 years later for $750,000. So we were able to increase the value for about $400,000 and get rent over those 2 years. And then you can see because of the amount of money we made, we obviously did a 1031 tax exchange on this property. Here's an apartment complex that we did. So again, 10x your efforts, 10x your results, over Flyway Pipeline, make prospecting a priority to drive results. We got this last deal I got from a Facebook post. There's no way I would have gotten it for $350. It was on the market. It would have had a ton of offers, but I got it from a Facebook post. Somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, I want to retire. I just want to sell." So again, that's where I say overflow your pipeline and make prospecting a priority. Now, this apartment complex, same thing. We purchased it. The units were leasing for about $500 to $550. It wasn't fully occupied. We went in and you can see the differences in this photos and this photos. We went in and did some improvements over time. You definitely do them in stages. This one was 32 units. So over the course of a few years, we increased the rents from $500 to $700 to $750, depending on the size of the unit, which now increased the value of the property. So I think we purchased it for 1.275, something like that. And then not only did we increase the monthly cash flow, but we sold it for 2.1. Obviously we did a 1031 tax exchange on this, but the reason why we were able to sell it for so much more is because when we purchased it, it was only bringing in $12,000 a month. By the time we sold it, it was bringing in $22,000 to $24,000 a month. So the more monthly income has increased the cap rate, which has now increased the value. Does that make sense? So Vanessa asked, when working with investors and determining the cap rate and cash flow, that is the most important information. Yes, especially in commercial. So, you know, a good cap rate in Oklahoma City is about 7 to 8%, but it definitely depends on the type of investment. So when I purchased one of my restaurants that had a absolute net lease, which was like a 16-year lease, I think it was at an 8 cap, that was a pretty good deal. Some people might be willing to take a lower cap, like if they're getting a big commercial corporation, like for example, Starbucks. I think Starbucks are typically at a 6% cap rate, which is lower, but that's also because you have a big corporation behind them. And then if you need to do something that's like these apartments, you need to go in and fix them. Obviously, you want to purchase at a higher cap rate, so there's room for improvement, which will increase the value. Any questions there? Checking time. Perfect. Here's some of the mistakes, most common mistakes. Don't buy just to buy. You want to make sure it's profitable. Like I said, people send us deals all the time and the numbers just don't make sense. So when you think investors are being difficult or maybe they're making lowball offers, a lot of times it just comes to the numbers and it's got to make sense for them. On the flip side of that, you don't want to purchase something just because it's cheap, because we all know cheaper is not always better. So definitely do your research in the market, in that neighborhood, in that community, and make sure that it makes sense. If you're going to be buying and hold, although I, have a kind heart and I want to be nice to I am nice to our tenants, but you also have to be firm. And the reason why, if you let tenants just get behind month after month after month, not only are you not doing yourself a favor from a business perspective, but you're also not doing them a favor because they're never going to be able to catch up. So although we work with our tenants, you have to also be firm and know when to draw the line. Implement late fees and notices. You have to treat it like a business. That's just the reality. If you don't, unfortunately, they will just walk all over you. So a lot of great information here. I did promise you guys that I put my contact information at the end. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. You can also schedule a free 15-minute strategy call on my calendar link, rewatcalendar.com. With